This is Grandmaster Boris Alterman and you're watching Gambit Guide. We are going to start today the new series of lecture. It's a Blumenfeld Gambit today. After d4, knight f6, c4. So black can reach this gambit line with a two different moves order. So the most, I would say, appropriate one is just to e6. So black is trying to get into the Nimzowitsch defense after knight c3 and bishop b4. So when white is going for knight f3 line, that black immediately plays c5, force white to move the pawn forward after d4, d5. So white is usually playing this d4, d5 move, winning the more space. And in case of e takes d5, c takes d5. So we have the classical position of Benoni defense. However, instead of capturing on d5, so black immediately could counterattack white's position, white's center, by the means of b7 and b5 move. If you are studying my lectures about the Benko Gambit, that you can realize that the position is quite similar. So let's say in case of d4, knight f6, and c4, black immediately could play c5, and after d5 to reach the real Benko Gambit by the b5 move. So in that case, if white is not accepting the pawn sacrifice immediately after c takes b5 and plays knight f3, so once again black has the opportunity to transpose from the Benko Gambit into the Blumenfeld Gambit after e7 and e6. So I could tell you that the Blumenfeld Gambit is even older than a Benko Gambit, because it was discovered already in 1920, 1918, something like that, by the Russian master, quite famous in Russia and of course the former Soviet Union Republic, Benjamin Blumenfeld. So this opening line was just fairly popularized by Alexander Sorokin, brilliant victory against one of the greatest German chess players, Siegfried Tarrasch, in 1922. And still, the Blumenfeld Gambit has a lot of supporters even today. So let's consider the main point of the black sacrifice. So as usual, we studied in all our lectures that in the opening you have to fight for the center, and with this b5 sacrifice, black is trying to get the full control over the dynamic situation. I mean, to move his pawns very fast into the center squares and to create the outpost for his pieces and to take the full control over the center, just trying to use dynamic potential of all his pieces. So in case of d takes e6 and f takes e6 and c takes b5, so black is just immediately playing d5, and for white it's quite difficult to create the counterplay, since black's development is quite easy. So one bishop is going to d6 and second bishop is going to b7. Knight from b8 could go to e7, also towards the center. So by move center pawns after e5 and then maybe e4 or d4, black is creating just very unpleasant pawns chain in the center. And white's extra pawn is just very difficult to fill here. Even white is just moving the a pawn after a4 and f5, it's still impossible to create any pass pawn or some real play on the queen side. So because black having still the a7 pawn, which just protects all black's positions there. Despite the fact that this opening line is quite rare just in today's practicing, there's a lot of tricks and traps already from the very first moves. I just like to show you a few. after b5, let's say, white cannot move immediately the knight into the center. So black is just managing his main idea, continue fighting for the center by moving b5 and to b4, so attacking the knight on c3. When white is going to play knight b5, in that case a6 just simply traps the knight. In case white is playing knight a4, so knight is just quite ugly placed on the corner of the board. And after knight b1, so it's quite easy to realize that capture on d5 and move bishop b7 leaves white with very difficult pawn structure. So the d5 pawn hardly even could be protected. After bishop g5, h6, bishop takes f6 and queen takes f6, b2 pawn now under attack. So let's say move like queen d2 leads to, after queen f5, to the situation when white is just losing his d5 pawn. So move queen f5 also prevents white from playing e4. In case of d6, black always could just win this pawn back by queen d5 and then just simply bishop takes to d6, keeping just huge advantage. If after bishop b7 white could try playing move like d6, same, black could just simply attack this pawn after queen b6 and next move bishop takes d6. White pawn on d6 is gone, so black is not only having material but also huge positional advantage. So it's absolutely clear that knight c3 cannot be recommended, and the other opportunity is to play maybe a4. In that case, after b takes c4, white has c3 move, holding the d5 pawn. However, even here after b4, it's a big question how to work the white center. So knight cannot move on c3 anymore. After g3, capture d5 and bishop b7, white just got into serious trouble. So d6, same idea, queen b6, and the pawn on d6 is going to fall very soon. Bishop f4, knight h5, a5, queen c6, and black got just serious advantage, since there is no good opportunity for white to attack his d6 pawn. So let's try to look at other options for white in this position, except of course c takes b5. So after b3, in case white is trying to protect his center, once again black is continuing e takes d5 and c takes d5 and bishop b7. So you can see this permanent problem is quite serious, and it's quite difficult for white to solve all the problems at once. So after bishop g5, possible immediately play h6, possible to play also queen to a5, and after bishop d2 to move the queen to b6, and still the d5 pawn is a serious pain in white's position. After d6 and knight e4, black is not only intending to capture on d6, but we have many other threats. So after bishop f4, black cannot move immediately queen f6 because of bishop e5. However, after queen b6, there is no way almost for white to protect his d6 pawn. So black is once again getting much better position already in the opening. Maybe white can try to play e4, which happened in the game Murzin against Maximica in the Blitz tournament 2004. However, after knight takes e4, bishop b2, and queen a5 check, there is no any serious compensation for white. Black is just simply 2 pawns up after bishop takes d5. So white's position is just ruined completely. So in case of bishop d3, of course we play knight takes d2. So more or less, white is having 3 main opportunities in this position after b7, b5. One, of course, is d takes, f takes, and c takes b5. second move here is main theoretical move is bishop g5. So white is trying to fight for the center of squares e4 and d5 by pinning the black's knight on f6. And the last one, which I would like just to show you, is queen c2 move. So white is intending immediate to support his pawn center after e2, e4. So the point of this queen c2 move is that after e takes d5, c takes d5, black's pawn on d5 cannot be captured. So knight takes d5 leads to the losing position for black after queen e4 check. So thanks to the hanging position of rook on a8, just black cannot leave the knight from d5 and to play knight e7, let's say. However, black is not forced to capture on d5 immediately, so can start with b takes e4 and e4, e takes d5, e takes d5, and after knight takes d5, white is having some compensation for a pawn, since queen e4 in this position easily could be met by queen e7, force white to exchange queens, leaving with just pawn down after queen takes e7 and bishop takes e7. After bishop takes c4, white is having some temporal initiative because he has better pieces development. But all the games I checked with this line not showing any great problem for black. So black could play also knight f6, which happened in the game between Gutschard and Bullet from the Power Tournament 2008, when after short castling, bishop e7, bishop g5, castling, knight c3, and bishop b7, black is not having any real problems and still having the pawn up, intending also bishop takes f3, also knight c6. So white has to fight here for equalizing. So as we can see, even queen c2 is not giving white any opportunities to fight for advantage. So it leaves in generally white with only two moves, two opportunities. One is d takes e6, and second is bishop g5. So here we are. To analyze the main ideas which happen in the famous game between Zygmunt Taras and Alexander Alokhin, played in Pat Pearson tournament 1922. So I believe that Taras, according to many sources, was just father of the new generation of the positional players like Akiba Rubinstein and Gezamarotsi, was just very surprised when Alokhin decided to sacrifice a pawn without any clear compensation. And Taras just simply captured on e6, and after f takes e6, captured on d5, and after d5, so Alokhin just now starts showing us the greatest potential on black's position. So black is not going to smash white's center so fast because we just cannot move immediately the pawn. So we have first of all to continue developing all our pieces before starting the actions in the center and on the king side. So after Alokhin played this position for the first time, this opening line became quite popular for a few years, and I found that Marco played against Zemish in the same tournament in 1922, and later on, once again in 1922, Gezamarotsi beat Boris Kostic, the same opening line. After e3, so today we know that maybe for white it was just better to develop the bishop to g2, immediately trying to protect his king side from the further aggression, since black plan anyway is the same. So the bishop has to go to d6, this bishop usually is going to b7, and black is trying to play e5 and e4, creating strong threats on the king side. And thanks to the semi-open file and the strong center, of course, we have just lot of just quite nice opportunity to continue the attack on the king side. That's why g3 move would be quite interesting solution for creating the serious barrier for all black pieces reaching the white's king side. However, Tarrasch played e3. At the same time, white decided to support the pawn on b5, and when Alohin played bishop d6, knight c3, castling, Tarrasch simply continued developing after bishop e2. So I also would like to show you that the plan with knight to d2 is also not enough for white. So when after knight b d2, bishop d6, b3 and e5, white decided to attack black center by e4, queen e7, bishop d3 and bishop b7, the position becomes very complicated. It happened as a game between Zemish and Marko. However, I believe that much simple for black to play in this position, bishop b7, avoiding any business with e4, and later on just to bring the knight to d7 to move the pawn later on after e5 and e4. So the position of knight on d2 is quite passive, even in that line. So, but let's back now to the Alohin's game. After e3, bishop d6, knight c3, short castling, bishop e2, bishop b7. I guess this game reminds me just one of the famous games which Kasparov won against Karpov in his World Championship match in 1985, when Kasparov just sacrificed the pawn in the Sicilian defense. Looked like black had no much compensation for it, but suddenly Karpov found himself in such a difficult position without almost any single useful move. So I would say the quite similar situation happened in this game, and not just difficult for white here to find any serious counterplay. So Tarrasch played here b3, and later on Boris Kostic, as I said, against Gezamarotse, used in this position immediate short castling, and after queen e7, queen c2, knight bd7, didn't find the way how to develop his pieces, since just very unpleasant e5 and e4 idea. And then black's knight or queen is coming to e5, looking towards the white's king side, and thanks to additional threat d5 and d4, it's extremely difficult to defend this position for white. So when Kostic played here bishop d3, Marotse just prevent white from any e4 business by simply moving the pawn after c4, bishop e2, knight c5, and black got the full control over the e4 square. Still e5 and e4 is in the air. The knight is getting just great outpost on d3. White's position is very, very difficult, and Marotse quite easy realize his huge positional advantage after just 34 moves. So that's why probably Tarrasch played b3. So he said, okay, not so difficult. Finally, I'm going to develop my bishop to b2, completing the development, connecting my rooks, and then maybe later on, after I parry the attack from the Russian, I would realize my pawn in the endgame. However, rook a to d8, bishop b2, e5, rook f to e1. So you ask what for white played this move, because it was not possible to stop e4 anymore. So white is ready to transfer this knight to f1 and just to set some defense for h2 pawn. So usually the knight is quite good defender, and e5, e4 is quite unpleasant idea. e4. Alokhin continued his plan. Knight d2. Knight e5. Knight d1. Knight f to g4. Black is intending queen h4. Black is intending knight takes h2. In many lines, black is intending knight takes f2. So once again, I would like to draw your attention that despite the fact white is having just extra pawn on the queen side, the whole fight is going into the center, and on the king side where black is having just huge advantage, just absolute domination. After bishop take g4 and knight take g4, white decide to play knight f1. So once again, knight covered the h2 square, so knight is on d1, knight on f1. Definitely it looks like white is just set up in the new games, all his pieces on the almost on the back rank, and black is having strong center, bishops pair, huge space advantage, and of course great opportunity on the king side. Queen g5. So Alokhin was just, I would say, the greatest master in such a position, and it's quite a serious problem now for white, how to stop black's further attack over the g2 pawn. At the same time, black is intending queen h5, attacking pawn on h2, but later on I believe that he is also intending to double the rooks over the f file. That's after rook d7, rook f7, and in many lines black also could transpose his rook from d6, lifting the rook from the d6 to g6 onto h6, so just to bring in all his pieces to the king side. In such a situation, when black is having a lot of space and great control over the center, it's almost impossible for white here to find the real defense. And this game once again support the well-known rule: when you have the advantage, you have immediately to start attack. And Alokhin very successfully continue aims on the king's side. h3, knight h6. So white to h6 and not to e5. Definitely after knight e5, white would be happy to exchange black's nasty knight. So by playing knight h6, black is intending to move these knights through f5 to h4, creating almost decisive threats against the g2 pawn. So all white pieces are so passive that there is no real opportunity for white to escape. King h1, knight f5. So now threats knight h4, force white to play knight h2, intending just after knight to meet knight h4 with rook g1, but this is time for black just to play d4, breaking up the center, and bishop on b7 joins the strong attack. At the same time, black is intending d3 to create the pass pawn, so white is almost in the losing situation right now. Bishop c1 is necessary to play, since after e takes d4 and e3, black is just simply ruins white's position. For instance, after knight takes e3, knight takes e3, so right now we are straight in queen takes g2 with a checkmate. It's necessary to capture now with the pawn, but then black is coming with the queen to g3, and knight f1 could be met by rook takes f1, so this simple sacrifice, and queen to h2, and this is a checkmate already. Same There's not a big help for white to play knight g4, since after queen takes h3 and then queen takes g4, black is just simply with the piece up and absolutely winning position. So when white just cannot touch the pawn on d4, it clearly shows that there is no way to escape anymore. Bishop c1. Pass pawn should be pushed. d3. Queen c4 check. King h8. Bishop b2. Knight g3 check. Once again, white cannot touch the g3 knight, since after f take g3, queen take g3, we have simultaneous attack on e1, rook, and knight on h2, so just white cannot save both pieces at the same time. So it means that white cannot capture on g3, and to play king g1 is necessary. Bishop d5. Queen a4. Knight e2 check. King h1. Rook f7. Black is just having the full control over the center, over the position. Next idea is just to bring the rook to f8 and finally to sacrifice on f2. So white is trying his last chance. Queen a6. h5. So black has a lot of time still, because white just cannot move his pieces. Alokhin prevents Tarrasch knight g4 idea at any case. At the same time, make his window for a king in case white's queen would reach the back rank, and intending later on just to play rook d to f8. b6. Once again, same tactics, knight g3 check. White cannot do much. A takes b6. Push the pawn after d2. Rook f1. Finally, knight takes f1. So black is having now not only positional, huge positional advantage, but also material. And after knight takes f1, bishop e6. Black is intending now bishop takes h3. So all the time we're creating so strong threats. King h1. And now, finally, Alokhin just finished the game with a nice shot. You can find it. Black to move, and just in a few moves, white resign. It's not so difficult, because all the standard ideas we know, when your opponent's king in such a dangerous situation, all your pieces are looking towards the king side, the combination should be bishop takes h3, just destroys the last shelter of white's king, the pawn structure. And after rook to f3, there is no way to avoid rook takes h3. Knight g3, h4. Tarrasch played here bishop f6. Of course, nothing could change white anymore. Queen takes f6 and knight takes e4. And Alokhin just simply moved rook takes h3, and the mate is inevitable. After king g2, queen f3, and then rook h1. So in this position, finally, Tarrasch decided that it's time to call it a day, and he resigned. Brilliant example how to use your strong center, how to develop your attack on the king side, bring in all the pieces, finishing development, connecting rooks, and of course, just great masterpiece from Alokhin of how to find the targets in your opponent, if you're in your opponent's position. And in that game, just it worked very well. In the next lecture, we are going to study more in deep the position after d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight f3, c5, d5, b5. When white is going for the main and the most important, of course, from the theoretical point of view, move bishop g5. When white is not accepting the pawn sacrifice but trying to counterattack the same way, black's position in the center by pinning or even threading a very strong knight on f6, which is just important piece in our fight against the white center squares, d5, and opportunity for white to get the space advantage after e2, e4. Thanks everybody for watching. If you have any question, you can leave me a message on ICC. See you next time.